we're going to talk about the three empires of West Central Africa. These empires spanned about 1,200 years, so of necessity, this will be an overview rather than an in-depth dive. Okay, now we will examine how geography, climate, natural resources, trade, internal and religious tensions, and pressure from neighbors created and changed the three major empires of West Central Africa. These are the Ghana, the Mali, and the Songhai empires. They
No.
eventually fell to European and Moroccan invasions. Now, if you look at this map,
was thinking that you could try
you'll
it
see
if it
you'll see the Mali Empire eventually reached to the Atlantic Ocean, and there are ports there. Those are ports through which the Portuguese came in and established trading outposts. But eventually, that was going to be the downfall of the empires. Okay, now there's a few basics we have to understand. And one of those is the climate zones of Africa. If you look here at this map of Africa, you see the bright orange and then the beige or tan underneath it. Those are the regions in which these empires existed. Now, north is the Sahara Desert, which we know is, of course, dry. But the Sahara Desert was very important because trade from North Africa and the Mediterranean came through the Sahara, and trade was essential to all of these empires. Now, getting back to the orange and beige areas, these were semi-arid. The orange is semi-arid, and the tan is grasslands. Agriculture, planting crops, raising livestock took place in there. And that was essential because as these empires grew, the need to feed more people grew greater. And this area, this land could support that. Next in the basics is the Sahel. I think it's how it's pronounced. I don't know. But the Sahel has a semi-arid region, western and of Western and North Central Africa. It forms a transitional zone between the arid Sahara Desert to the north and the belt of humid savannas to the south. This is a vital and central region of all the empires we'll discuss. Another basic, the Niger River, agricultural richness. Now, the Niger River overflowed annually, just like the Nile, and it allowed for growing of a number of crops, including wheat, millet, sorghum, rice, cotton, peanuts, sesame, and vegetables. It also provided fish. It was also very important to ship products. Now, if you look at the very top here, I don't know if you can see my pointer.
Yep. Yes.
Okay. Do you see how close the river comes to the Sahara Desert? This was a major point for goods coming from the Sahara into this area and being shipped along the river. And remember this spot because this is where the city of Timbuktu was built. Okay. The basics, iron ore. If you look, there were iron deposits of iron ore in this region. You can see there's currently a mine there where this red spot is. Now, if you look to the right, you'll see three bands of green, a light green, a medium green, and a dark green. This medium green ran through the empires that we're discussing, and it consisted of deciduous forests. Now, in order to make iron, you need to smelt it with fire. These empires were blessed with iron ore and the fuel to smelt iron into implements. Now, this had several benefits for these communities. First, the iron ore was smelted into agricultural instruments like plowshares and pruning hooks. So their agriculture was more productive than their neighbors. Plus, they made iron weapons. Their neighbors had Neolithic weapons. They could not match the armies of these empires. So iron was an extremely important product aspect of these empires. Now the basics, gold. Gold deposits were located, well, in not all the empires, but two of them, and I'll get to that. They were mined for gold nuggets and gold dust, and it made them very rich. The gold nuggets were exchanged with other societies through traders, and the dust was used for local commerce. Now, so gold was very important. The basics of the domestication of the camel, the ship of the Sahara. The camel was domesticated around 300 BC in the southern Sahara, or what's now Somalia. It was introduced to the Western Sahara about 300 AD. This allowed trade between the cultures of the north and south across the desert, which had not been possible before that. The Sahel, which runs along the southern border of the Sahara, as we saw, became the crossing point for this trade. And there was a great economic, strategic benefit because these cultures could tax all of the trade going in and out of their territories, which made them very wealthy. And something I learned, which I hadn't known, was that after a cross-Sahara trip, a camel required a year to recuperate before it could make the trip again. Okay, the basics, the salt trade in the region. Now, salt was a precious commodity in Western Central Africa. It was very scarce there, and it was important because it permitted the preservation of food and the maintenance of electrolytes, as well as the control of perspiration in a hot climate. It was so important that the exchange of gold to salt was sometimes near a one-to-one exchange. The king stored and controlled salt in salt reserves. The salt was traded for other goods such as gold, ivory, hides, copper, iron, and cereals. The salt was cut into slabs that weighed up to 200 pounds and then carried by camels, as you can see, and then distributed along the rivers. And in some remote areas, the salt could be valued more than gold. Now, there were tensions in all of these empires. They were united by a king who, by various means, kept the empire intact. But at different times, however, tribes wanted greater independence, self-determination, or outright independence. This influenced the tension. This tension influenced the stability of the empires. Their tribes, which we're not going to get into, were the Dogon, Boab, Bobo, Senufo, and Minyanka, amongst others. And of course, greed, personal ambition, and religious tension had the same effects then that they have now. The basics, the enslavement of human beings. Now, the enslavement of human beings was practiced by all the empires we will examine. Trade in enslaved people was an accepted part of their economies. Their enslavement was not based upon race. It's interesting. The idea of Black people did not exist in Africa. They regarded themselves by their tribes because they could not differentiate themselves by race, just like white Americans cannot separate ourselves as no, that's not true actually, but there was no Black people until the Europeans came. Now, amongst those who were slaves were war captives, people abducted from other tribes, and chattel. These people were used in the empires and sold to places across the Sahara. The labor ranged from harsh salt mining, difficult work, and agriculture to domestic work in homes. Some men were actually rendered eunuchs to guard harems. Now, the precursors of the Ghana Empire were the Soninke people, also known as Sarakole and the Marca. They were an ancient West African group who founded the Ghana Empire, which was also known as Ouagadougou, and that was between the 6th and 12th centuries AD. The Soninke were agriculturists who lived south of the Sahara, in the Sahel region, and they were threatened by raids from pastoral nomads who herded their animals in the Sahel too. To protect themselves, the Soninke communities joined forces to form a loose federation of states, which eventually became the Kingdom of Ghana. The Ghana Empire Ouagadougou. The origins of the Ghana Empire are shrouded in mystery because the early civilizations had no writing. Now, the Ghana Empire was established by the Soninke people who originally farmed sorghum and millet in the Sahel 3000 to 1000 BC, well before any records could be kept. Now, the tribes united under a man named Dinga Sise, who was referred to as Ghana, which means warrior king. They joined in mutual defense against the desert nomads from the Sahara. Eventually, the kingdom went from being known as Ouagadougou to Ghana in reference to the warrior king. The Soninke were the dominant tribe because they controlled the cross-Sahara trade, and that would become a liability because they controlled the West Africa, the cross-Sahara trade, and other tribes within the empire became jealous of the Soninke monopoly on that trade. Now, the empire of the Ghana trade. Now, the Soninke were known for their long-distance trade, and they established colonies and markets throughout the Sahara. There were oases that served as way stations through the desert, and the traders knew how to find them, which you can imagine is essential if you're going to survive crossing the Sahara. Now, they also collected taxes on all goods entering and leaving the empire. The empire did not control the gold mines, but it controlled the gold commerce that passed through it, which is, of course, exceptionally lucrative. This created great wealth, which the king used to pay a large standing army that was loyal to him. You have to understand, the people back then were not very wealthy. If he could get strong men to be in an army, they would be loyal to him because they could get wealth beyond what they ever could have imagined. The political and social structure of the Ghana Empire. The political and social structures of the Ghana Empire were based on castes and vassals. It was divided into social groups, and there were 6 social classes. First was the single one, the king, who ruled over everyone, and it was thought to have divine powers. And that was important because if they thought he had divine powers, he held control over powers that they couldn't begin to match. Then was the nobles. They fought in the king's army and provided it with weapons. They were vassals. They paid taxes to the king and also supplied the armies. Now, next were the farmers. This was the largest social class in the Ghana Empire, and they worked on the land owned by the nobles. There were a lot of mouths to feed. There were a lot of people to feed. The farmers were very, very important. Now, craftsmen and tradesmen came next, and they produced things like metalwork and pottery. Now, the metalwork was very important because they made weapons and agricultural implements. And lastly were the slaves. The slaves worked for richer people of ancient Ghana, and they were often traded for textiles, beads, or other finished goods. In ancient Ghana, you could not move from one social class to the other. However, you could not be demoted from one social class to the other. So at least there was some stability in that. The introduction of Islam into the Ghana Empire. Islam was introduced into the Ghana Empire in the 9th and 10th centuries. It was introduced by Arab merchants who had strong Islamic beliefs. Now, in the interest of maintaining good trade with the Muslim traders, the king and wealthy families adopted Islam. Mosques were built throughout the empire. Um, but still, the native religions were tolerated and accepted because the kings knew that the empires would fall apart if religious turmoil ever broke out. Kumbi Saleh, the capital. The Kingdom of Ghana, you can see Kumbi Saleh here in this green section, was the capital of the Ghana Empire. It was north near the Sahara, which was a strategic location due to the importance of cross-Sahara trade. It actually consisted of two cities about 6 miles apart. It was a hub for the exchange of gold, iron, salt, ivory, and commodities. It actually consisted of two cities. Now, after the fall of Ghana, Kumbe Salah fell into oblivion and was actually just recently unearthed. That's because other trade areas became more important and was no longer relevant. Agriculture of the Ghana Empire, we'll get back to farmers here. They grew many crops, including rice, millet, sesame, sorghum, and vegetables, among other crops. These were grown in the moist Sahel and along the Niger River, which again overflowed and provided with very, very rich soil. The use of iron farming implements made agricultural production really great and allowed the population to increase. Goats and cows were grazed on the lands that were less conducive to planting crops. And you can see here there's also fish because they got fish from the Niger River. The Ghana Empire Army. The Ghana Army was large, well-trained and commanded, and was loyal to the king. As we talked, the soldiers were paid, so they were loyal. Now, they had metal weapons, which, as I said, were more advanced than other tribes in the area. The king also used the army to keep the vassals controlled and maintain trade routes, which were essential to this economic survival. The army consisted of men armed with spears, swords, and they had archers too. You can see these are actually some of the photos of some of the weapons they had. And imagine this against wooden spears with stone points, or against bow and arrows with just wooden shafts, whereas they had bows and arrows with shafts with metal tips. Okay. The zenith of the Ghana Empire was in the 11th century. Its wealth from cross-Sahara trade was immense. They used gold to exchange for luxury goods from Arab traders, such as textiles, beads, coppers, and horses. Even dogs wore gold collars, and horses slept on plush carpets. This is how extravagant they were. Now, the agriculture produced enough to meet the needs of the people, as well as to meet the needs of all the people, including traders who would come in and out. Also, the king, as I think I said, he surrounded himself with an air of divinity to get his people to defend him because they were afraid. Now, there were stresses on the Ghana Empire. The population of the Ghana Empire was large and there was overpopulation in the cities. Climate began to change and the Sahel became drier, which reduced agricultural output. At the same time, new trade routes were opening further east in Africa. So now trade from North Africa, the Mediterranean, was finding new ways to get further south. And that reduced the trade through Ghana, so its economy suffered. Now, the vassals started sensing weakness, and they began to rebel against the empire. And there was also the jealousy, fear, and anger of neighboring tribes. Now, Ghana's neighbor had mostly converted to Islam and pressured the empire to convert as well. Ghana allowed its peoples to continue to practice Islam, but mostly maintained their ancestral religions. The king Tunka Manden never converted to Islam, which irritated his Islamic neighbors. Now, north of the Ghana Empire was the Almoravid dynasty, which actually came from North African Berbers. They were fanatically Muslim, and they went on wars to convert their neighbors. Now, they not only wanted to convert their neighbors, but they wanted to take control of the cross-Sahara trade. And you can see here in this map, the orange area is the Almoravids, and if the purple down here, which is cut off, is the Ghana Empire. So you can see their proximity. Well, the Ghana Empire was in a state of decline. There was the revolts of the Ghana vassals. It was a perfect time for the Almoravids to invade, which they did. And they invaded Ghana in 1076. Now, there was disquiet and actually chaos for a while, and the Ghana Empire actually fell in 1235. Now, between that time, there was instability. Various tribes controlled Ghana until the Mali Empire consolidated power and incorporated Ghana into its lands. Now, the Mali Empire was a successor of the Ghana Empire. It arose after the fall of the Ghana Empire in a period of political instability, during which no strong entity could consolidate power. The origins of the Mali Empire, the precursors of the Mali Empire was the Kangaba Kingdom, which was part of the Ghana Empire originally and was located on the upper reaches of the Niger River. Now, the Kangaba were one of the tribes who the Soninke would not let participate in the cross-Sahara trade. And when they saw how dogs had gold collars, horses were sleeping on silk carpets, and they were not allowed to participate in that trade, you can imagine how angry, how resentful, how jealous they became. So war broke out in the Ghana Empire, and the Kangaba, because the Kangaba from the Kangaba Kingdom. Now, the founder of the Mali Empire was Sundiata Keita. He was from the Mandinka tribe of the Kangaba Kingdom, and he united several tribes while the empire of Ghana was declining. So he was making moves to consolidate these various factions to make a force that he could work with. He organized them into a unified group, which was able to assert dominance during the period of political turmoil. He had a strong, disciplined army and resources from cross-Sahara trade because he took over that trade. He was nominally Muslim, which helped him maintain good relations with the Muslim traders and merchants, but he tolerated indigenous religions. These indigenous people imbued him with semi-divine powers, so that benefited Sundiata to straddle Islam and indigenous religions. He established his capital at Niani, which was in his native region. You can see Niani is right here, that red spot on the map here. He also realized that things had to change. He had to change society in order to make it more stable. And he instituted reforms. He instituted what's called the Manden Charter. It was also known as the Kurukan Fuga. It's an oral rather than a written charter, and it's been passed down through generations through the Malinke. It was a highly organized and hierarchical system. It speaks about peace within a diverse nation, which is a really novel concept at that time, the abolition of slavery, which is exceptionally novel, the importance of education, and food security for the people. Think of how revolutionary that was at that time. It also created castes of rulers, workers, and farmers. The Kuruk and Fuga gave exclusive generational monopolies to iron smelters, woodworkers, and tanners because these were so important. And we're going to get a bit into the culture now. The tanners were important because they worked the skins of goats and sheep into writing materials for the bindings for books and administrative records. The woodworkers made doors and art, which were highly valued. And of course, the iron workers made the implements for for farming and weapons. Now, here's some instances of Mali wood and book art. And these books actually still exist in private libraries. And this art, some of this is modern Malinka art, but some of it is ancient. You can see this was highly valued. Another thing is that in Mali, doors were given as gifts, were used in commercial exchange, and were similar to money. The images in the doors represented status, occupation, fertility, and ritual. Now, on the doors, there were images. The doors originally were to protect the harvest. Ancestral beings were carved onto the doors for the purpose of protect what lies on the other side of the door. In other words, who's inside. Also, the doors recognized spiritual beings that were in charge of fertility and agriculture. And can you see where I'm pointing here? Here and here, do you see these breast-like images? Those were for fertility, so the families could have many children. They were fertility fetishes to promote fertility. The government of the Mali Empire, the Mali Empire was too big for one person to govern over. So they were administered by what's called the Jantan Norwaro, carriers of the quiver. In other words, people who were armed, who were responsible for the defense and regional administration of the Tinkurus, the provinces, and the Kafos, the counties. Now, because they lived there, these ministers were familiar with each district and the events and sympathies that they're in. And so they counseled the king on domestic issues, how best to manage the people. Courts settled disputes and judged those who broke the law. Slavery in the Mali Empire. Although the Kuruk and Fuga had outlawed slavery, it continued, and enslaved people were a source of labor and income when they were sold. Enslaved people were never dehumanized. Their humanity was always and dignity were always recognized. And from the Kuruk and Fuga, it was said, do not ill-treat the slaves. We are the master of the slaves, but not the bag he carries. Now, one of the things I say in this, I think I might have missed saying it earlier, but I learned during my research to call these people enslaved people. If they're regarded as slaves, that attaches a single identity to them as subservient to the people whom they serve. If they're called enslaved people, it recognizes their humanity and the fact that against their will, they were deprived of agency, freedom, and independence of action, which is how I learned to say enslaved people rather than slaves. Now, Sundiata also realized that his people needed food, so he expanded the empire westward toward the Atlantic Ocean to take control of the agriculturally fertile lands here. This land had never been possessed by the Ghana Empire. Through administrative delegation, he incorporated this land into his empire. He also conquered the gold-producing regions of Bambouk and Bondu, which are down here. You can see this orange areas where the gold was. Now, instead of being middlemen in the gold trade, the Mali Empire controlled it. Now, the gold miners were not required to become Muslims because there was a belief that magic and wizardry were involved in successfully finding gold. And if you became a Muslim and gave up your pagan religion, you didn't have that. The empire could not afford to have the people who found gold lose their ability to find gold. So they allowed these people to not convert to Islam. Now, all gold nuggets belong to the king, but gold dust could be kept and traded between the citizens. After Sundiata's death, several potential successors vied for control of the empire. The ultimate victor was Mansa Sakura. Mansa became the official title of the king. Under Sakura, the territory of Mali was greatly expanded along the Gambia River to the ocean. It was a much bigger country now. Now, Mansa Musa was the ninth king of the Mali Empire, and he was extravagantly rich. People today say that he is the richest man who ever existed. He had an immense stockpile of gold, and he traded in ivory, slaves, spices, silks, and ceramics, amongst other things. Under Mansa Musa, the Mali Empire expanded its territory to its greatest extent. He conquered the Songhai, which was very important, which would eventually defeat and replace the empire. Mansa Musa and the zenith of the Mali Empire. I think that I just did that. Okay. The expanse of the Mali Empire. You can see here how huge it was. It contained the countries of what are now Mauritania, Senegal, Guinea, Burkina Faso, Mali, Niger, Nigeria, and Chad. And it ensured decades of peace in Western Africa. Timbuktu, commercial post and center of Islamic scholarship. Now, as we had said early, as you can see, Timbuktu is on the edge of the Sahara near the Niger River, which made it an ideal spot for Trans-Saharan trade. In the early 1300s, Mansa Musa built mosques and a university of Islamic learning in Timbuktu. It became a center of Islamic cultures with many mosques, madrasas, and scholars. The University of Timbuktu was known for its brilliance and produced many scholars. Now, it wasn't a university in the modern sense. It was actually a series of mosques where young men were taught in madrasas, but it became one of the primary centers of Islamic learning. Mansa Musa, being an observant Muslim, made a pilgrimage to Mecca, but it was extremely influential in history. In the 17th year of his reign, 1324, he set out on a famous pilgrimage to Mecca. This pilgrimage awakened the world to the wealth of Mansa Musa. He was a kind man, and he felt he should support other Muslims. So he took so much gold with him. He had a retinue of thousands of baggage trains with 80 camels, each camel carrying 300 pounds of gold in nuggets. He gave gold to poor and charitable organizations along the Hajj. He even caused the value of gold to plummet in causing the inflation. And actually, these countries were eager to get him out because their economies were suffering because of the inflation of gold. Now, this also alerted the European countries about the wealth of the Mali Empire, which they had never known. They heard about this extravagant gold, and that piqued their ears, which we'll learn more about. Now, the decline of the Mali Empire. After the death of Mansa Musa in 1337, the stability of the Mali Empire declined. There were multiple contenders for succession. They fought, and trade decreased due to as we said, the other routes outside the empire. Tribes controlled by the Mali Empire, feeling its weakness, rebelled and gained independence. The Masi, the gentleman who mentioned that who during the introductory period mentioned he had heard the Masi from the southeast border took over that area of control of that area and the control of the important Niger River. The Songhai eventually overtook all of the Mali Empire and even more. And as we said, the Songhai were here. They were defeated. They'd been defeated by the Mali. No, the ascendants of the Songhai. By the 1430s, Mali had collapsed to small independent states. The Songhai, due to its trade, was wealthy and was strong militarily and saw the opportunity to expand. Under Soni Ali, a ruthless and brilliant leader who ruled 1464 to 1492, Songhai conquered its neighbors east and west. Gao was a large city capital of the Songhai Empire. It was located on the Niger, you can see, and which provided rich agricultural land and transportation. It was wealthy and traded many regional items for Mediterranean goods. A tremendous number of trade routes converged here. The Mali Empire out early 1300s. As the Mali Empire collapsed, the Gao Kingdom, a constituent client state of Mali, gained its independence, and then the Songhai conquered that. Gao traded for cola nuts, gold, ivory, precious woods, slaves, spices, palm oil, salt, textiles, weapons, copper, and horses. And Mansa Musa, who we had heard of earlier, actually diverted his return from his Hajj to visit it because he had heard so much about it. Now, Sunni Ali, who united, was he brilliant, or the question is, was he brilliant or was he a psychopath? He might have been both. He was subject to fits of murderous rage. Now, he resented well-educated and people and probably felt inferior to them because he came from simple roots. He was actually the son of a king. Let's see, which king was he? Okay, he was the son of one of the kings that was controlled by Sunni Ali, of the country of the tribes that was controlled by Sunni Ali. And Sunni Ali took the sons of these kings and held them as hostages to make sure that they wouldn't be attacked, because no king wanted to have his son executed. Well, Sunni Ali was denied an education, so he felt inferior to the educated, which is something he always carried with him. Now, he reorganized the military. He became aware of the effectiveness of horses in combat. He greatly expanded the number of horses in his empire, and he crossbred horses so they could be more capable of withstanding the African heat. He put armor on his cavalry, which hadn't been before, and on his horses. He built a navy of 400 boats to rapidly transport troops up and down the Niger River. He used terror and extreme brutality to conquer and suppress rebellion. He forced conquered tribes into his military. And as an example, in one battle, he slaughtered an entire tribe until the remnants could fit under the shade of a single tree. That's how brutal he was. He had 40,000 infantry and 10,000 cavalry. And when these attacked, they could trample the enemy. There was really no fighting back. The destruction of Timbuktu in 1468. During the decline of the Mali Empire, Timbuktu was conquered by the Tuareg. They were a tribe of desert nomads who conquered Timbuktu, and the Muslim leader of Timbuktu appealed to Sonny Ali, a fellow Muslim, to cross the Niger River. He promised that if Sonny Ali would come and help him, he would help Sonny Ali cross the Niger River if he drove out the Tuareg. Sonny Ali's army drove out the Tuareg, but Timbuktu reneged on their promise. Sonny Ali killed many of its inhabitants and plundered the city. Much of the city's culture and erudition were lost. He was probably also partially motivated by hatred and jealousy of the well-educated. Sonny Ali was regarded as a butcher and a tyrant, and the destruction of the city of Timbuktu and its Muslim scholarship was condemned by Islamic leaders. And that was very bad for him because he was leading a Muslim country. The expansion of the Songhai Empire. After the destruction of Timbuktu, Sonny Ali captured Jenne, which was another important trade city. It was a major one of the major commercial and trading cities in Africa. He conquered after devastating 1473 after a devastating 7-year siege. He wanted to have the greatest economic resources possible. At this point, he controlled the most important trading points were Gao, Timbuktu, and Jenne. The beginning of the end of the Songhai Empire. The Songhai Empire was weakening for several reasons. Gold was discovered in South America, and now they didn't require countries didn't require Songhai gold to have their gold supplies. So the Songhai gold became less valuable. Also, trade ships were lessening the importance of Trans-Saharan Africa, which damaged the economy. Religious frictions on the interpretation of Islam caused schisms, and a drought caused food supplies to dwindle. When Songhai died, his son Askia took over. Okay, there was succession. I lost the train here, but there was succession, and several tribes started to revolt. The Moroccan Empire to the north. The Saadian Empire in present-day Morocco to the north had become wealthy from European trade and wanted to expand its trans-Saharan trade. They wanted to take over the gold mines of the Songhai. In addition, the Saadian Empire was farming sugarcane and wanted to enslave many more people as laborers, which they sought from the south. The Saadian Empire had guns and cannons and gunpowder. At the decisive Battle of Tondibi, the Saadians destroyed the Songhai Empire, and the remains descended into war amongst themselves. Now, at the beginning of the Battle of Tondibi, this important battle, the Songhai stampeded 1,000 cattle against the Saadian lines, but they stampeded back because they were scared of the sound of the guns. The Songhai could not return to formation, and when the Saadi formation advanced forward with guns and cannons blazing, the Songhai were routed and could not form a new army. Portuguese raids and enslavement. The Portuguese had started establishing trading points on the coast of West Central Africa, the Songhai Empire. They originally sought ivory, salt, spices, gold, and textiles. However, at this time, agriculture in the Americas was expanding exponentially, and enslaved people were much more valuable to these than any other commodities. The Portuguese concentrated on purchasing and transporting enslaved people. They broke any remaining social cohesion by enlisting Africans to trade in other Africans. They had superior weaponry, so they could threaten the people that if they didn't provide them with enslaved people, they would enslave those people themselves. So those people, to preserve themselves, went out and caught other people to sell to the Portuguese. Cohesion crumbled under the slave and enslaved under the trade in enslaved humans. And the Americas the Americas and the Sondians and the age of West African empires came to an end. Um, and that's the end of my presentation.
Great. Good job. Thank you,
Thank
Michael.
you.
Thank you, Michael.
Thank you. I lost.
We're gonna shift into the conversation portion of the evening, and I just want to sort of let people know that our sort of we want to limit comment, raise your hand if you have a comment or question, and limit comments or questions to one at a time and to less than 2 or 3 minutes ideally. And if you want to respond to what someone just said, feel free to just speak up and try to keep that towards quick comments or clarifying questions to under 20 seconds or so. But feel free to, have it be conversational, even though we're a large group. It's nice to give everybody a chance to speak. So, that said, Michael, do you want me to take hands, or do you want to call on people?
Well, could you, for the time being, I'm going to excuse myself for a moment.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yep, no problem. Kay Davis. Kylie, I think it was.
Sorry. Oh, it's in safe driving mode. That's why. Okay. I did something. I don't know how to take that off. This was great. I just want to say to the presenters, this is amazing. I did want to, when he gets a chance, if he could kind of go over the kind of like the time span, the years, and then when actual European influence kind of came into the picture. I asked the question in the chat, but I did see that we had kind of started around 300 AD, and then we kind of ended here around 1600s. But just to give like color to like kind of like context what's happening in the rest of the world. And also for the succession, I believe it was Sunni Baru who was the son of Sunni Ali, and that's who succeeded him in the Songhai dynasty. Askia Muhammad was, I also forget. I'm so sorry, but he was there too. But yeah, but that was it.
Well, yeah, I think some of the civilizations that he was talking about were actually before 300 AD, if I'm not mistaken. I think I heard some like
Yeah.
BC years.
Yeah, I just wasn't sure of where we actually.
Yeah, I think he jumped around quite a bit, and so we may want to give Michael a minute to come back, and then he'll be able to better answer the question. So let's give him a minute.
What's my hand keeps going down?
When you talk, it should go down.
I wasn't talking.
That's interesting. It usually goes down when you're talking if there's sound in the background.
Yeah. Oh, maybe it's sound.
Yeah, if there's any sound in the background, that could do it.
I don't know if Michael. Oh, there's Michael.
Back.
I had a couple of questions. One, a comment. Thank you so much for the presentation.
Carl, if we could first, I want to let because Kylie had a question, and I don't think Michael was here to answer it. So, Kylie, do you mind asking that question again? And I'll be right back.
Sure, no problem. It's Kyrie for everyone. I know he's gone. So Michael, number one, thank you so much for this. This is amazing. Even me going to a historically Black college university didn't get everything that you mentioned. It was really cool. I just wanted a little bit of kind of like clarification on the timeline of where we started, just add context and color to like the background of what was like happening in like the rest of the world. Having gone to college, I did meet a lot of folks from Nigeria and Burkina Faso and Senegal and Morocco and such, and they kind of like told these stories firsthand. So like it's cool. And then hearing this is amazing. But I believe I heard, not sure where we started. I think it was around 300 AD, and then or even before then, and then wound up here in the 1500s, I believe. And if you could just like give the exact, or rather a range point of like where European influence started, and like started them going out into the world, going on interacting with the rest of the countries, and then of course Europeans interacting with them.
Well, I don't know that I actually learned that, but I know that King Henry the Navigator wanted his people, his country, to start exploring to get international trade. He was not on the Mediterranean coast, so he was cut off from that trade. And he commissioned his country to become better map makers, better navigators, and to develop a ship that could withstand the harsh currents of around Africa. And I think they might have actually been afraid to cross the equator for some reason, probably some illogical reason. I'm not sure when all this happened, but I think it was Henry the Navigator who sent people there. If someone can get online and look at Portuguese arrival in Africa, that question could be answered, but actually, Kali, I don't have that information.
And then Carl had a question as well.
Thank you.
And it was 1415 that the Portuguese arrived in Africa.
One is I'm glad I finally found out where Timbuktu was. Because I mean that's the famous right expression, like they sent them off in a box to Timbuktu. So that was famous, but I didn't know it was right at that junction of the two rivers. So that was great to know. I was kind of curious, and I don't know if Michael, you would know this or anybody else in the room, but this idea, like you always learn about great empires that like you've never heard of before. Like, you hear of Genghis Khan and you hear of Alexander the Great and the Romans, and I'm wondering like Sunni Ali and that empires that you were talking about, like I'd never heard of. And I'm wondering, does anybody know why? Maybe they were not, I don't know. Maybe they didn't
I
conquer.
can lobby an educated guess as to why, but I'm a little biased. I'm not sure if American, and this is actually just from on my time in New York and discussing this topic and like the kind of political revolution we've been going through since like 2016. How American history is taught is from a European lens. How any history is taught is going to be from that country's lens, and whatever the majority country of that country is going to make them kind of look like the hero, regardless of what's, couple that with a kind of low opinion of dark-skinned people and their culture and a non-interest in kind of digging deeper, because to get that history, you would have to go further. Like all this gathered was really only recent. I believe like around the 1800s when they really started like knowing more about the history of Central West Africa and like all these kingdoms and the kingdom of Kush and Mali. So because they had to do more work, there wasn't written records. There was more like, it was mostly oral. Things were passed down by griots or storytellers. And so because that wasn't there were gaps. There was an assumption that they were inferior, and there was just really no real need. Like there's been so many wrong things said about African people, like how the wheel wasn't invented until Europeans got there, and it's just clearly not true from this man's
that makes actually so Kali, that makes a lot of sense actually, and it makes it's common sense. I'm not common sense. It makes a lot of sense. So I'm wondering, within the African countries themselves and in the universities there and them teaching, is there a more accurate history of the countries and the people there? that now with all the cross-cultural between academics that they would know
There, this is what he's talking about is taught there. They teach their own history because they know how to, because it's passed down to them. That
Right.
they're within their culture, it's different because the writing systems came later. And so like the folks I met when I was in college, they were you couldn't tell them nothing because they were over here, they had enough money to send them to an American college, so they were already African royalty essentially. One of my psychology teachers, she was Nigerian, professors rather, and she had scars on her cheeks. And when you have that, that's like a mark of like that's a very high mark. She had 3 on each one, and the more you have, the more basically influence and money your family has. So she was up there. And like if you ever go to graduation and you see an African student who gets good marks, their parents are dressed to the nines. Their whole family's there. Like they have like an actual society. That's just, we have a very like it's through movies. So we have a very weird sense of Africa. We look at Africa as one thing, and clearly it's not. Again, from because even Black people don't know this, and it's something that I had to teach myself. Even after college, I had to learn a lot of this myself, just because of how our culture sees Africa. Sorry,
makes sense. Thank you.
Could I gander an answer to that too?
Yeah, please. You're the lecturer.
Yeah. One thing I read was that we enslaved Black people from Africa, deprived them of their humanity, of their agency, their freedom, their ability to bring to fruition their natural potentials. If we learned about the extent of their civilization, what they had accomplished, their empires, we would have to admit that they were just as human as we are, that they were just as capable of producing civilization and culture as we are.
Right.
By not learning that, it's a way of kind of assuaging our communal guilt about what we did to these people.
Right. And dehumanize them.
Yeah.
Dehumanization.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That makes a lot of sense. Yeah. Thank you, Michael.
Yeah, I worry about that with revisionist history, and to the victor goes the spoils, but the victors write the history books. And I think your insight, Kyrie, was really added a lot to this too. So thanks for piping up.
Yeah, that was going to be my guess, Carly, is that it's, history is written by the conquerors, but Africa doesn't tend to have a lot of influence on international curriculums, right? And so, Westerners like to write about how Westerners were the ones that, basically that's all that gets taught about. And the other thing that I think is a fair argument is, Michael covered a lot of the key points of African history, but it's very complex, very nuanced. There are, thousands of ethnicities and cultures. He had high points, but it's also very hard to do justice to teaching African history. But that's another thing that I think contributes to it. That
I had to be very selective because I was reading a lot about rivalries between tribes, between brothers, between cousins, different economies, scales of economy. If I just covered the first 10 years of the Ghana Empire, I could have made a whole presentation if I wanted to become it was the first 100 years of the Ghana. I could have made a whole hour presentation that was so complex. I had to be selective in covering such a wide span of time.
I could address a bit of these problems. I certainly agree with, I guess, Kyrie, but of course, American history and British history is very Eurocentric. So it focuses on Europe, and it goes back to Greece and Rome and the Mediterranean and and some over to Asia. But yeah, African history is pretty well ignored. But of course, the other factor is there's very little. Most of Africa below the Sahara didn't have any writing really until the Europeans arrived. Now, you showed the Library of Timbuktu. Those books were all written in Arabic. So in the Sahel, due to the cross-Saharan trade, they did pick up Arabic, and so they were writing in Arabic at the time of these empires. There was a question about the timeline. I think the earliest reference to the first empire, the Ghana Empire, was around 800. Now, probably it goes back before that, but without any written record. There's little knowledge of that.
Is that
so
AD? I'm sorry.
This is, yes, yeah, AD or CE. So most of the story takes place that Michael was telling was around 800 CE. The Ghana is 800 to about 1200 and some. Mali Empire is 1250, let's see, I guess around 1250 to 1400 and some. And then the Songhai Empire is the 1400s to about 1600 when it collapsed. So that's the general timeline. Concerning the Portuguese, as I think Michael mentioned, the Portuguese, or somebody mentioned, the Portuguese started having ocean-going ships and were exploring down the coast of Africa, south from Portugal, in the mid-1400s, around 1440 or so. And that was the prelude, shall we say, to Columbus, who sailed down the coast of Africa and then sailed across to the Caribbean in 1492. So about 50 years after the Portuguese had sailed down the coast and explored the coast of Africa. The Europeans, of course, the Trans-Saharan trade was all with the North Africans, particularly the Moroccans, and only very indirectly with the Europeans. The Europeans never crossed the Sahara, and the Africans never crossed the Sahara up into Europe. So the Arabs in North Africa were always any go-betweens between what very little contact or trade there was between sub-Saharan Africa and Europe. But now, once the Portuguese started trading, they established trading posts along the coast, but they couldn't really go into the interior. So they didn't have any contact with these or empires, maybe a little bit in Senegal, but not in Central West Africa, because the central part of the Central West Africa was known as the white man's graveyard, because anybody who went, they sent a few expeditions in there, and everybody died of malaria. So it was absolutely deadly for Europeans who had, the Africans have immunity against malaria, which the Europeans don't. And it wasn't until chloroquine was developed as a protection against malaria in the late 19th century that the Europeans could actually go inland. And that's when the Europeans started colonizing West Africa and moving into the interior, into places like Mali and Burkina Faso and Niger. But before that, they at the time of these empires, they couldn't. But of course, after 60, but the empires had all collapsed, partly due to the Moroccan attacks. So the African empires were all completely gone by the time the Europeans started coming into the interior in the 19th century. Thanks.
Thank you.
Am I next again?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. Something kind of was brought to my mind here about, so there's evidence that the birth of Homo sapiens was in Africa, correct? and that we all kind of traveled across the world.
Yep, that's
And
around.
so my question is why did it become that it's the Europeans that conquered Africa? In other words, like, why would they were so much more not civilized, but advanced? They had guns and, weapons. That I've always wondered about that. Why did Africa?
There's a good book on that called Guns, Germs, and Steel. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, I heard about it. That answers the question?
Yeah.
Okay. I'll check it out. Thank you.
In fact, with those three words, it answers no, it's more nuanced, but he gives a long history of like including agriculture and it does include guns, germs, and steel, but it's an interesting book.
But really, my question is why would they advance enough to invent guns versus not the
It
Africans?
goes into that. Yeah, it goes into starting from like early evolution and why Europeans created those technologies.
You also have to look at like and Michael kind of touched upon this earlier, like how extravagant their lives were, and then how kind of it was almost a bit easy amongst themselves to bring them down because of the climate. They didn't really have to worry about winter. Worrying about, of course, drought season, the rainy season, animal, that stuff actually is less of a worry all put together than 3 months of cold and winter and no food at all. So when Europeans had to deal with that, they learned how to prepare more so for long periods. And this is back then. Like can you imagine the supermarket not being open for 4 months every single year? Like my friend lives on a farm in Kansas, and he was talking to me in end of June, getting ready for winter. Like it's mind blowing. We actually think about it.
Are you saying that the distress made us kind of more resilient and smarter to advance civilization rather than
more so for the distress? You could say it that way. It's more so survival. Because that's when most people die. Most people die in the winter, and just historically, and it just developed. Just like how in Africans, in a lot of African societies, people always say, well, Black people always run fast, or they have like an extra muscle in their leg. It's like, well, many tribes had runners to like deliver mail and to like deliver messages across tribes. Like that's how they got there, even before horses, of course. And that's just how they were trained. And they had to deliver those messages and make it back alive, like with actual lions and tigers and bears and all that good stuff. So like just from where they were geographically, I think I haven't read that book, but that probably added a lot to why they developed those kinds of things.
Okay. Thank you.
I could add a bit on Jared Diamond's argument in Guns, Germs, and Steel. The rise of Europe was tied to the rise of the Middle East and China. So it was really, he calls it the rise of Eurasia. There was a Eurasian civilization and technology. For example, gunpowder wasn't invented in Europe. It was invented in China around 700 AD, and then spread across and gradually came into Europe around 1300. It happens that the Middle East, the Fertile Crescent, was an enormously biological rich environment, and that's where cattle came from, sheep, goats, horses, and so on. Horses, I think Michael mentioned, horses came down into Africa from Central Asia, where they were domesticated. Africa just didn't have any substantial domesticable animals. So the camels had to come in from the Middle East, horses likewise from Europe and Central Asia. A lot of the major crops, the corn, cotton, wheat, all came in ultimately from the Fertile Crescent. Paper was invented in China, and then moved across the Middle East into Europe, and then eventually down into sub-Saharan Africa. So Eurasia had an enormous geographical scope and a whole variety of resources that could spread easily from east to west, all the way from China to Britain. Africa is much narrower. It's separated by the Sahara Desert from Eurasia and is very segmented north to south. So the Sahel is the Sahara Desert is can't be developed. The Sahel is one ecosystem. The savanna and lightly forested land in West Africa is a different ecosystem. The tropical rainforest in equatorial Africa is different. So it was very hard for technologies and resources to move north and south in Africa or to get into Africa, whereas things could very easily spread across from Western Europe to Asia. So there was a lot more scope for development and spread and even competition and technological development. Thanks.
Okay, that makes sense.
Thank you.
So basically the weather.
Or geography. Basically,
geography,
and weather is part of geography, yeah.
Interesting.
Those are really good points. I was going to mention Jared Diamond's book. Both of you have referenced The Guns, Germs, and Steel. I also know of another history book called Salt. And for the life of me, I can't remember if they mentioned much about that African influence, about the salt trades and such in the Ghanaian Empire too. So if anybody knows. But yeah, I think the other points I was going to make were already covered by others. So this is great.
I've also heard diet, which kind of makes sense maybe. When we started eating meat and milk or something, I don't know.
Whereas, for evolution, yeah. I was talking about salt as world history and its trade and preserving food and all that kind of stuff too. There's a book called Salt.
Yeah, it does discuss the Mali Empire in Timbuktu.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, that was the whole reason why salt was so like.
I wonder if Yuval Harari mentions that in *Sapiens* as well, maybe.
I think so. As far as you're talking about the evolution and why that started mostly in the Europe aspect.
Right.
Yeah, so it was weather and technology and yeah, all kinds of different variations. But as far as I think Kyrie also mentioned just the enormity of the African continent. Our globes and maps that we see do not do it justice. It's, I think I put a link in the chat about how it's at least 3 times the size of the US. And if you were to think about things on tribal levels, much like we do the indigenous people or what we call the Indian tribes here in the US, there's just a plethora of those. And so, of course, there's, who knows how many civilizations and cultures and peoples that have been, lost to time or just as the world does sort of adapted to other cultures that infiltrate.
Right. Thanks, Carly.
Anyone else have questions, comments, things that they wanted to talk about?
I just had one more comment and I'll shut up, I promise. But this whole presentation was I just want to reiterate, was just really great. And a lot of Black Americans don't get to learn this unless we go on our own, just like everyone else to go on our own, or you go to HBCU and you meet actual folks from these countries, and that's really how you learn. You still got to either sign up for the class. It's not like there's Black celebration on HBCUs, but not like deep into the history unless you're taking the actual classes. And much like was touched upon earlier, when Black folks were brought over here, they were taken from all kinds of tribes where slavery was normal. However, there were no writing systems or whatever. Everything was just passed down, and they were all put together. And I think that's something that a lot of people, when I have conversations about, modern day Black folks in America and how we got here in slavery, and then then I mentioned like, oh yeah, well, we had empires that like were way before Europeans, and the way we look at it, they don't understand how diverse the people that we came from were, and the fact that Black Americans made something out of nothing, literally had to start over and make a brand new culture. I think is a missed thing because we do not learn this history here. And I think if that was taught more, it would add a lot more context to how, I guess, America just views, or rather European countries view, African countries and view their place, because those countries, like how extravagant their lives were, they were surrounded by riches. Like speaking of geography, that's where all the riches are. When they say blood, diamonds, and gold, it's in people's to this day. To this day, there's old women in Senegal finding giant diamonds and gold in their backyards. That's how rich the soil is. Like everything that powers our cell phones and laptops come from Africa, because you cannot find it anywhere else. It's much kind of unfortunately in a way, because of what's going on. But yeah, like they are literally, African countries by weight of precious metals are the richest countries in the world.
Sunny, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just reading recently a book which had some comments about the defense of colonialism. That was very interesting because you talked about European domination in the world, and basically the idea what they were pushing was the age of discovery. There were other large empires, but they had no inclination to have global exploration. And the Europeans, for some reason, had that motivation, So they got to places where others did not go. China was a huge empire. They didn't do that. And so they got there first. And so they had whatever happened after that there's positive and negatives, you can always argue for and against, but they took the first step, the leap. And so that's to their advantage. It's not just the weather or the climate, but it's also the motivation, that was fascinating.
Also, I want to just make one correction, Carly, that when you were saying that all the electronics come from ingredients in Africa, I'm not sure what you were referring to. The one that I usually hear is rare earth metals, but most of those are actually mined in China. That's 60 to 70% of the global supply. Did you have another type of resource in mind?
Not top of resource off the top of my head. I do remember reading about from a couple of resources, most of it that a lot of it comes from many of like the key, maybe not many, but it's like a few key precious metals. They're key to electronics, laptops, cell phones are mostly and only found in Africa. I do know I have read more lately. It's a little controversial about the cobalt mines. Really, especially that are used that use electronic vehicles. But the way to get to them is, they're mined horribly under a corrupt government, that just want the money, and there's children in there.
Yeah,
but yeah,
so you're right. It's cobalt, platinum, the platinum group metals, tantalum, gold, copper, and there's a little bit of rare earth elements in South Africa and Burundi, but it's one of the minor producers of that particular thing. But that was more what I was
maybe rare. Yeah, maybe rare earth was like the wrong phrase there.
No, you didn't say rare earth. I was the one that was like,
oh.
That was me that put that in. So that was my fault.
No,
I just didn't know about the other one, so I appreciate your educating me. So
no, you're fine. Thanks.
Yeah. So Ozan, go ahead.
Hi, folks. Thank you for your inputs, and thank you, Michael, for bringing out this mysterious source to dive into different, interesting questions. And it made me think deeper and deeper. And I like the question why people were more like improve their skill set or political ways more than the motherland of America, Africa, or yeah, and then why we don't really hear these big events. It was really a profound question, you know, both of them were very profound and really give me a little bit emotional, uh, big emotional, like I don't know how to describe it, but I'm having an emotional time when I'm thinking about those things. But I think the same way that the weather caused a lot of um, problem solving, push the problem solving because you're not in the comfort of sun and you know that comfort of the most suitable livelihood neighborhood. So you have to create something like this. Like one of the biggest threat to life is cold, and it's like you have to do something about it, and then you have to be fast. And about these historical events, you don't really hear like when I even talk to people about Ottoman Empire, when I ask them, do they know about it? What they know about it? What's their comment about it? How the relationship was in their perspective? Because, you know, I am in a different part of the world. And I really come across with people, they don't know anything about it most of the time. So eventually it became, recently people says that Ottoman Empire wasn't actually like a worldwide empire. It was just what was that? A Mediterranean empire. I'm like so shocked. But there's also one more thing in that there are some like I was listening this guy talking about how having the potential, actual potential to recognized. It's like if you heat the water to 98 degree, it's gonna be very hot, but it's not gonna be boiling. And one more degree, 99 degree, still super hot, but it's not boiling. And the one degree is missing there. And when you put that 1 degree, it's gonna boil and it's gonna start the big engine going on because it's gonna start boiling and that's gonna create the pressure to uh, keep going the engine. So I think one of those things that, and one of the things I was listening Schopenhauer's perspective on the why wisdom, and he was saying like if you're smart or wise, the one of the biggest obstacle in life gonna be you're gonna face this is the biggest threat to human being. If you're smart and you know that is the natural element that you have to actually capture the world as a species, you are the um, biggest force due to your intellectual level of understanding the world and how you can actually process the information. So um, it's gonna be a threat for anybody, and the other people going to actually undermine that and try to take over that part, and your mostly the bad parts, bad manners going to be recalled. And I believe there is a richness in these cultures, and it gives us that when you look at that, if you don't hear something about some places and they're not noisy, there is something harmonious going on, in my opinion. And I feel like that harmoniousness is not really interesting for a human being because we continuously seek for power and we want that power to keep in our hand. And if you have that power, let's say, and I have your, I am, I have the information about your wisdom. I would like to keep it in my agenda or my inventory and say that this was me actually doing in the history. I found this amazing thing, and I saw so many like empires or religions or everything, and you collectively look at it, people actually it's so weird. Even it's obvious that is not belong to them originally, people don't hesitate to say, this is my culture. That is coming from my culture. This is coming from my source, because there is a balance in the power. It has to be actually applicable in a sense to keep that momentum of power keep going. I think we don't hear from those like a richness because of that. I mean, I would really enjoy if we can access to those amazing cultures, or even in the American culture. I'm like, I wish I know really much more about like a, you know, like a Native American culture in a sense to really appreciate it and like learn, just to learn and satisfy my curiosity, I guess. But yeah, thank you guys for really bringing up these interesting questions.
Well, Michael, I want to extend a thank you again for doing this research. Wanted to know also what some of your sources were. You said that you studied this for a number of months during recovery. Garrett, thanks again for hosting this platform. I'm just very impressed with everybody contributing and learning new things that otherwise we may not be exposed to. And again, Kyrie, thanks for your input. I think that gave a lot more depth to what we've talked about and answered here too.
Well, I use the internet a lot, and at first I didn't have the strength to go to the library, but I cross-referenced a lot of the stuff I read with stuff I found in the library because I wanted to make certain it was true before I used it. The images I got all from the internet. But everything that I put, I didn't take from a single source. If I found something that appeared to be factual, I cross-referenced it with several times to make sure it was accurate. And, you know, recuperating from heart surgery, I didn't have that much mobility to be able to go and do much research. So I was pretty much limited until I could get to the library, limited to the internet.
And were you able to find ample resources online that you were able to verify or cross-reference? Because it was a great presentation. I really appreciate your notes.
Thank you. Thank you. I really enjoyed doing it. And I thank Garrett for inspiring me.
Mm-hmm.
What other questions do people have? And thank you all for the kind words. And thanks, Michael, for presenting.
Yes, thank you,
for
Michael.
inspiring me.
Thank you, Michael. It was really good.
So what's next?
And I'm glad you enjoyed it.
That's a great question. Let me actually get next week's event. Oh, it's on why conservatives are so successful globally. So should be interesting.
Who's presenting that?
Me.
Oh, okay.
I guess we will start with the definition of successful.
Well, yeah, I mean, well, you know, it was pretty big sweep in U.S. elections. That was a big.
Oh, you mean like successful politically?
Yeah, politically.
Oh,
I don't think humanly. I don't know if they're successful.
Well, that'll be a different discussion. I'm talking about the political movement of conservatism is growing in a lot of countries. You know, you have Le Pen in France, you have Bolsonaro in was it Brazil? And you know, the conservatives are very successful, and I'm going to be mostly talking about U.S. conservatives because that's what I know the best. But I think that
you could actually even tie that, and you can tie that into what we heard tonight. To be honest with you, no, for real. Like when he was talking about how, yeah, no, but we was talking about how when the economy was because next week I'm sure you're going to touch on the economy as a big driver. when they rebelled against Mansa Musa, Mansa Musa is considered the richest person in like living history. To be honest with you, he was surrounded by gold and riches, but when all that was harming the economy, those folks rebelled. You can consider that in philosophical terms, conservatism just being traditional, the way of of course take care of yourself, but being responsible enough to everyone doing their part for the economy, for a flowing economy. So even as far as back then, the economy, which we'll probably talk on next week, would be a big driver of that, and it has been ever since dawn of man. Really, it boils down to money and resources, and how one spends it and devies it out.
One question I will raise is whether they're really conservatives or whether they're actually radicals, because they don't seem to be conserving the Constitution.
Yeah, I was going to make that point too, Michael. Yeah, it seems not really normal conservatives.
Yes.
If it's kind of for the global sweep or this wave, it can be likened to American history when you had the reactionaries and the other folks. I don't know who the other folks are.
Yeah. Well, I guess between this last week and now, there's been plenty of discussion as to the why it happened, right? So I'm sure there's going to be a lot of similarities, maybe, and we have about why there was such a sweep. But there's definitely not a shortage of pointing fingers. So
I'm kind of interested in how much disinformation was involved in people's decisions. It seems like a lot of people were working off of, fake information, but
could be, yeah.
So
what I gathered so far is
so I want to give him a chance. I'm happy to continue the conversation after all the hands are down. We can sort of do a precursor to next week if we want to, if we're done with all the questions on the empires of Africa. But Kevin, go ahead. Good to see you.
Hey, what's going on? So I just want to give props to Michael for talking about these three empires. I was expecting that since I saw the time period. I was like, okay, he's going to talk about the Songhai and the Songhai and the Malian and Ghanaian Empire. I wasn't expecting him to go into depth because there's really a lot of stuff anyway. But just want to give him props because, there's a lot of different areas of history that you're not going to get in school, whether it's in Asia when it comes to, going into depth into Mongol Empire, or talking about other parts of Africa when it comes to the Benin, the Kingdom of Benin, or, the Kingdom of Kush, or, other empires like the Babylonian Empire and other things. And there's like over, I don't know, let's say 70 plus empires and kingdoms you can go to when it comes to the 6 continents. So it's a massive area, and yeah, I don't expect the education system to go into that depth. I don't expect them to go into the depth when they still don't even you don't even learn the whole totality of American history. So even if they can't even tell the whole story of America, then why do I expect American education to talk about all the rest of the world? So yeah, just have to give props in that area, just to talk about that area because, it's most of the time they talk about part of Europe. They give you like a little summary or thing. They don't go into in depth even on some parts of Europe when it comes to their parts of history. So just talking about Africa and, and stuff, just give your thumbs up on that.
Thank you. Well,
and also just that, and just to also add, if you want more in-depth information, for those who want more information on those empires and other kingdoms and empires that were going on in Africa, because there's others, even ones that were during BC, before Christ, before those 3 empires, which is, the Egyptian as well as Kingdom of Kush and some other ones. And of course, the ones in the Middle East, when you're talking about the Babylonian and all that other stuff. I mean, I would say for the African one, you can pick like Infographics Africa, which is a YouTube channel, which also talks about it. And you have some other channels that talk about it as well. But the thing that I like about Infographics Africa is that it actually gives you visuals and different things where it does a really good presentation in a short time, So it's like, in the 9-10 minute mark instead of going into 19 and long minutes. But they actually do a very good way of, doing it concise and at the same time, precise and concise when it comes to, and as well as having some good amount of detail. So, yeah, just want to add that in there as well. But yeah, give you a check mark on that, because there's not many people who talks about that area or even parts of Asia when it comes to their kingdoms as well.
Well, thank you. And it was very enlightening to me too.
If there are other questions, feel free to ask Michael or make comments. Otherwise, I'm happy to go back to the conversation about conservatives. I'm going to actually look. I wrote an essay on this, but I have to update it because it's been a while since I wrote it. But...
Yeah, you have plenty of information since last Tuesday.
Yeah.
To update. Should be interesting. I mean, the news, right, every day there's the like who's getting all the posts, right? All the cabinet posts, and you hear about this person got this and this person got this, and you just kind of like, I don't know about anybody else, but I'm horrified at the lack of what's the word? Expertise in the matter, maybe.
It's gonna be something. I have a question, Garrett. If I may not be able to attend next week, is there a way that you could do also maybe a rehash? And with that,
oh, you got cut off.
Sorry. I've been part of a group here in Denver that we meet in person once monthly for a couple years now, called the Post-Partisan Forum, where we were trying to bridge the gap of left and right in the politics identities, and have been mulling over a number of different ideas. The fellow that helps run that has been real good about getting a lot of sort of both sides of information, as we talked about the importance of recognizing the issues and disinformation. So reading a lot of conservative writers and articles and such, and then the ideas of what we do about that. If there's a way that I could bridge both of those groups at some point, where we do maybe even like a hybrid where we meet in person and join on a Zoom or something, that would be elucidating to a lot of people in some ways to, again, just get more information and spread good ideas for what it is, so that we don't have to be so completely divisive in this country and politics and information, and the fact that we can't even figure out who experts are, let alone follow the experts. And I'm worried about the institutions and all sorts of things with that. But
yeah, no, understandable, and that's definitely part of what I'm trying to do with the FTI, is to bridge the divide. And I would be happy to collaborate. Next week, we will be recording like we do every week, and the event will be going up on Zoom afterwards. So it'll be captured, but if there's a way
on Zoom or YouTube.
What's that?
You post on YouTube, correct?
So we record it on Zoom, and then we edit the video and then put it up on YouTube afterward.
Great.
Yeah.
Okay, well, I will email you. Thank you, everybody, for your input tonight and just being thinking, caring people. Rock on.
Thank you.
Thank you, Carly.
Thanks, Carly. And I'll also I should have put it in earlier, but I'll put in a link in for people that want to learn more about the FTI, speaking of which, bridging the political divide. So you can learn more about it here. I should So anyone have other comments or questions?
I was just going to add to what Carly was saying about identity politics and parties and that whole idea. To look into a sortition as a possible answer, Carly. If you're not familiar with sortition, it's a way to kind of like eliminate 99% of all the problems that people have with politics and politicians.
Will you throw that in the chat? I don't know if I'm hearing you correctly.
Yeah.
Thanks.
It's basically the definition of sortition is basically randomly selecting your leaders instead of voting for them. So it's an unorthodox, but actually proven to be more effective than the voting mechanisms in the studies that I've heard about. So, which is, to me says not that sortition is a great solution, but that our current solution, is terrible, and there's got to be a better way. I'd still like to get better than sortition, but I'm warming up to Carl's love of sortition and thinking it might be a good step forward from where we are until we can figure out a better way forward.
I mean, there's a lot of misunderstanding about it. I mean, the randomly selected people doesn't mean that they're going to lead necessarily. They're not replacing the politicians. It's the same way that if you look at a court and the jury system, the jurors are not the judge, but the jurors are deliberating and hearing from the experts in order to make a decision and make it, but the great thing about it is that there's no parties. It's really literally a government of the people, by the people, for the people. It's randomly.
You definitely have to do a presentation on this, because the one that I read about, Carl, they were literally, the leaders were randomly selected, but it was in schools. And so, it was like the high school president, right? And in there, it's like low stakes. It's not a big deal to randomly select someone. I don't think you want to randomly select president of the United States, but like.
Oh no, I would probably, the way I visualize is that I'm not really an expert yet, but the discussions by the average representatives, right, which will be literally the most diverse, right, represents you, because we are it. Imagine like if all of us right now in this group were randomly selected, we would present who we think in discussing, we would present who the best leaders are for the rest of the country to vote on. So it wouldn't be just like, hey, Joe Schmo, who has the most money and buys the most ads or is the most corrupt, gets the vote. So it's a lot more common sense and humanistic and more representative than it is today, especially with the whole idea of the two parties. And it's like it's crazy. Every 4 years we go through the same thing,
I mean, it always goes back and forth, right? And there's no one can make a mistake so bad that the party goes away and gets replaced by something else, even though we've seen some really bad stuff happen. That hasn't happened, and so I think we do need something better. So Carl, definitely put together a presentation for that one. I want to hear it.
Okay. I know Colorado just voted down the ranked choice voting option. And again, I think that's due to a lot of ignorance.
Yes.
That people just don't know. And it's hard for me to talk with people that are very politically knowledgeable and convince them that most people in this world, I believe, are not that politically knowledgeable, let alone they're just not knowledgeable about much at all. And there's the Dunning-Kruger aspect and the disinformation and everything else. That said, as far as actual ideas and defining what conservatism is, et cetera, those may matter. But moreover, how do we get people to actually believe what is good information and truth rather than opinions and concepts and different philosophies? Those are all different concepts. Anyway.
Yeah, agreed. And I'm sorry to hear that force ranked voting was knocked down. Like that's it's just what's called monotonically better, meaning better in every way, pretty much, way of voting, because it allows you to vote for a third party without hurting the person who's closest to the third party. So we should do an event on that, on force ranked voting, so that we can educate people about it, because that that tells me exactly what you said, Carly, is that people were uninformed or misinformed more likely by the two parties, because the two parties don't want forced rank voting, right? The two parties don't want it because they always have a ticket to the game every game. They're the only games in town right now. And with forced rank voting, third parties have a chance. And a third party can actually take over from, one of the two parties, and that's fine. Like it works that way. So Ozan.
Hi, so it sounds like a little bit of Aristotle's like democracy, that
Yeah,
some group of
it
people.
was it was in Athens. It was tried out. Yeah.
That is actually very high need right now, just because of the life is so expanded in different ways, and it's kind of, but you can, if you have that, maybe that mechanism that can check in this, like if some people just try to manage fairly and improving the better policies, and the others doing different things. Because when you start thinking about policies and politics in the international politics, I mean, how can you be informed as an average person who has a full-time job? It's very, I don't know, it's very difficult right now.
Yeah.
It's like, it's very tough to have an idea about what's the latest technology, or what we're gonna eat, what is healthy. It's very tough.
I agree. But there's so much, I think that there's so much corruption in politics in terms of money, like the lobbying. Like basically politicians, professional politicians are basically controlled by anybody who has the most money. So the policies are really the one who pay the politician to vote for them, basically, So that's not the average person, right? Meanwhile, the average person has to pay higher prices and deal with all the problems that they're dealing with, that the politicians keep promising to solve, but they don't. As soon as they get to Washington, it's either they have the right heart, but they discover the corruption and there's nothing they can do about it, or they just fall and become corrupt themselves. And then that's, it's just a broken system, and nobody really either realizes this, or maybe they complain about it, but they don't know what to do about it. But there's a way.
Like I said, it's like this, how is gonna be applicable on the system right now, or how are you gonna make people accept it? Because the human nature is very reactive, It's like if you say something, I mean, it's gonna be unknown, and it's being the responsibility part of the life, kind of. It's just very tough to really.
Well, the way I go about it is basically the way that I discovered it, because when I didn't even know that existed, right? And when I saw a TED talk on it, so it was a 30 minutes of the information about it, and I swear to you, it was such a reaction, because everything that was said was solving a problem that I was having with politics. Like all the complaints that we have about politics, right? How it's crazy, corrupt, money, unfair, only two systems, doesn't represent there were like, I don't know, 10, 15 things that I was like pissed off about, and it solved them all. And I was like, wow, why? That's a great system then. And that's why I'm passionate about it, because I think it really solves all the problems that most people have about politics and politicians.
Yeah, I like to have that policies, like policy making kind of position. Actually, I don't really want to. I really hate those kind of stuff, but because of the value system I have in my mind, I feel like it is necessary. We were talking about peacemaking in the world. Like there was a group, online group, they invited me for that, and we were discussing this. And then people are talking about these peacemaking strategies, how they can make the peace applicable in the world. And I said, this is like the one of the best thing we can live, and we all want to, because like this is something we all chase for, right? I mean, we all want peace. And then all of a sudden, there was someone joining from Ukraine, and it just shattered all my mind. Like I'm like, this guy is talking about, I mean, the kids, like the people, like the suffer, like his right life from war zone. I'm like, oh my God, how are we gonna accept this? Like, how I'm gonna speak now. I mean, who am I to speak right now? It's like it's very tough to talk, but you have to talk. I mean, if you think you can have kind of, you can have saying and it might have an effect on the world, you want to locally say that, and then it's tough
Yeah.
conversation to apply peace.
I like to say the only surefire way to fail is to not try at all. Right. So we have to talk. We have to talk about these things. We have to try to think about solutions to them. And to your point, Ozan, about, well, people have a job. How do they have time for this? If you look at the average number of hours an American watches TV a day, it's like 3 or 4 hours, I think, is the average. So that means there are people watching TV more than 3 or 4 hours a day. Just, how much value does watching TV add to our lives? Like, really, is that like where we want to spend our time? Like, time is the one resource we'll never get back on this earth. And I think we should spend it on things that are more useful. And yeah, maybe TV has gone down, but I'll bet you that it's been replaced by social media.
Yeah.
So
I just put that. Yeah, it's on screen.
Yeah.
It's on your phone.
The by the way, Ozan, the answer about people have jobs, they have lives, they're tired, they don't want to think about politics or policy making, all that stuff. What sortition is that once you are selected randomly, that is going to become your full-time job for a year or two or whatever. It's like a contract that you make to, give back to society and play your civic role, and you'll get paid, right? Whatever your job is. So it's not like you'll lose your job. Kind of like, again, with the jury system, even though they don't pay you as much on the jury, but you're committed to that time. And during that time, you rise to the challenge to solve the problems of your country. And I think that's a lot of people would rise to that challenge, I think,
we were talking, sorry, we were talking about this, like what could be the effective ways to, and one of the persons said the language is very important. I am seeing people talking like it's gonna be war in between two parties, like it's happened in Turkey, so I know experience. So I mean, the language is so important. And when I started university, started reading literature, I learned I am a super black, ignorant person. I don't know anything. And it's very tough to love something and cannot reach it. It's like the biggest burden. Like I want to be nice, like intellectual or like being productive person, but I can't because I don't have the inventory and stuff. And then I asked them, like, I told them, this is amazing point. When I'm looking at the movies, and I'm asking people here, locals, 80s, 90 years old. I've had friends like always older people. I love people. They carry the like different values, different like background, and then I am very interested in them, and I love to listen to people. And I ask them, can you give me a couple of like movies that I can adapt good manners from, good like an ethic from? No, there is none almost. They can't recall like specific one. Or I'm looking at the books. I can't really find books that gonna teach me exactly.
Yeah, I don't mean to cut you off, Ozan, but I do have to shut down because I got to put my kids to bed. So I just want to thank everybody for coming. Thank Michael especially for presenting, and thank you all for being part of the community. And let's keep collaborating and talking about ways to make the world a better place. We do define what better means in the FTI in a very clear way with the 5 intentions. And so far, I haven't heard any good reason that they're wrong. And if I ever do, then I'll just change them so that they're right again. Because I like to say, you're only wrong when it's clear that you're wrong and you refuse to admit it. When we admit we're wrong with good judgment, we're immediately right again. We're more right than we were before. So never feel afraid to admit you're wrong. It shows courage and resilience and learning rather than the stubbornness of refusing to admit you're wrong when it's clear you're wrong, which doesn't look good for anyone. So thank you all. Hope you all have a great rest of your night. And thanks again for participating tonight.